Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters of the Week video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do this random entry from the cryptids.wikia.com website. Once again, just a random page entry landing on any page, and then whatever it lands on, I'll go ahead and I'll talk about it here. What's interesting is that it landed on yet another serpentine-like creature. These are almost like a fan favorite of sorts within my channel. Lots of people that love these particular creatures, so definitely this is going to be something that a lot of you will actually want to see and then hear about the information on it. Also, what's very interesting is that this doesn't deal with a creature out there in the middle of nowhere in some remote portion of the world. No, in this case, it has to do with its location in the great state of New York. So definitely a populous area. In fact, I mentioned the lake here in a minute where it's located at. So who knows, those of you that live near that lake might have a chance of running into it. But it goes by one particular name that definitely stands out. It's known as Old Greeny, and you're looking at a representation of it here. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating information associated with this Loch Ness serpentine-like creature. So what is this Old Greeny? Well, apparently it's a creature, again, a Loch Ness type 1, that's associated there in New York, specifically at an area near Cayuga Lake. So those of you, again, that happen to be near that lake, those of you that know that name by heart, who knows, you may have a chance of running into this creature sometime in the future. But yes, Cayuga Lake is actually part of another set of lakes known as Finger Lakes. The reason for it is because they literally look like fingers, almost like somebody dragged their fingers across the land itself and left these almost longish type lakes within them. They're actually glacial lakes that have remaining water within them, but Cayuga Lake happens to be the longest one there. I'll talk about more about another lake here in just a minute that could also house Old Greeny as well. As far as the characteristics of Old Greeny, unfortunately, there's not much associated with it. Its sightings have been very, very rare, even though it's been around for quite some time. Apparently, the earliest known tracings back into the 1800s, the late 1800s, in other words, there just haven't been too many descriptions of it. But when I was reading this information, I just easily pictured your classic token Loch Ness type creature, something involving a long serpentine body. Who knows how long it is altogether, and the fact that it's called Old Greeny gives you an idea essentially what its color would be. You could only imagine its skin being a very, very greenish hue. Definitely stands out within the water, maybe even from far away as well. And then who knows what else it has with it in terms of stuff like scales associated with it, or maybe even spikes as well. You just take your pick when it comes to these serpentine-like creatures. Although in one instance it seems like it had a very long set of sharp teeth that are tied to it as well, at least based on an encounter that I'll talk about again here in just 1 minute. But yeah, it's found there in Cayuga Lake, and what's interesting is that this lake is about 40 miles long, so it definitely has a very good chance of remaining hidden throughout this entire time. Not only that, but it's over 400 feet deep as well. So running into this creature will definitely be a one-off type situation. But as far as its encounters, here's essentially what happened. One of the earliest known instances, at least of it being reported, was in 1897. So how about that? A good time period away there in the Ithaca Journal. There on January 5th, 1897, one of the reporters there stated that some of the staff there had been living almost in anticipation of Old Greeny's appearance. Apparently, they were there nearby that lake, and some of them were so fearful of Old Greeny's appearance that they actually rejected assignments that would take them near the edge of the water because they wanted to make sure that they didn't run into this creature here. So you would think that at that point, during that time period, there were probably more sightings tied to Old Greeny, but again, because of the 1800s, and then again not being too much technology to essentially post this here and there and cite recordings, I imagine a lot of that just basically got lost in time. But otherwise, that was one of the earliest known instances. And in fact, there was one involving someone who was driving along the lake sometime later in the 1900s, and that's when he saw, as he described, a large, long sea serpent there within the shore itself. So I don't know if this means that Old Greeny was resting by the shore side, maybe soaking up some sun, if you will. But then that's at least one other sighting from someone that happened to be driving by that location. Other sightings include the potential of not just one, but two Old Greenies within that lake. And that's because of this. There's yet another lake. Remember I was mentioning the lakes being the Five Finger Lakes, or the Finger Lakes altogether. Well, those lakes themselves, another one is called the Cayuga Lake. This one is actually the largest lake of the actual lakes there, and there's reports of yet another Old Greeny type monster there too. So there's a chance that there could be not just one, but two, or it could be that this is the same creature, but it is traversing somehow underneath the ground. Like there's maybe some type of subterranean water tunnels that it is using to go from point A to point B, because otherwise these are lakes. Obviously, there's no connection tied to them. And that's why they stand on an isolated point. But if there is truly some type of subterranean tunnels, then that gives the existence the chance of this being the same creature, but just in two spots altogether. Because there at the Cayuga Lake, that's where people described seeing a similar type creature being about 12 to 15 feet in length, and that this creature was also there, maybe even as part of a sea serpent family. So how about that when it comes to this thing, this Old Greeny, not just being its only member of its species, but apparently having two of them, and then maybe even having an entire family altogether. I would still think this would make sense because, again, with these lakes being so vast and large as they are, and having so many locations, and then also potentially those subterranean water tunnels, it could absolutely exist in harmony and peace with hardly any kind of sightings altogether. But it cut to again to about a little different time period, this time 1974. This is where I was mentioning earlier how there's apparently more description of it in terms of its teeth and its jaws. There was an encounter by a teenage boy by the name of Stephen Griffin, and he was there swimming in the lake of Cayuga Lake, and while he was doing so, apparently he got attacked by something that he described as a very, very large eel, but with jaws so powerful that when they snapped down onto his arm, it actually broke his arm altogether. The only reason I cast a little doubt on this is because if you're dealing with a lake-type monster, something again Loch Ness size, or maybe something with large teeth, you would think that there would be more damage associated with the boy's arm, more harmful damage, maybe even up to the point of amputation. But no, in this case, he just suffered an actual broken arm, and then that was it. Thank goodness on his part, because otherwise things could have been much, much worse for him, especially out there in the middle of the lake. But he alleges that that was Old Greeny, that was definitely something that attacked him there. The only other thing that I could think of is there's a chance that maybe this was, speaking again of the family of sea serpents there, maybe this was a younger version of Old Greeny. Maybe this was one of the ones that was just barely a baby, in other words, and was still growing outward. But otherwise, another fateful encounter occurred a couple of years later in 1979. There, a guy by the name of Jack Marshall, who owned a business called JT Marshall Professional Diving Service, he was boating there with some friends in Cayuga Lake, and as he was cresting along the waters, that's when his boat had to suddenly stop. And that's because in front of them, they thought they saw actually a very large log that was blocking their pathway. So they wanted to make sure that they didn't hit it and then collide with it and have some damage. So as they did so, they stopped and they were trying to get this log out of the way. That's when, lo and behold, they realized that this was not a log. This was actually a real life creature. Something, in other words, started staring back at them. It was measured to be about 30 to 35 feet long altogether. And this was a sea serpent-like creature because immediately it slipped below the surface of the water, as you imagine like a giant eel or a giant snake would. Definitely not like a log that would just be floating elsewhere out of the way. No, in this case, it clearly and purposefully went underwater, and then that was it. It was gone. So definitely another memorable experience. But other than those encounters that I was mentioning, there haven't been really much other type of situations there at Cayuga Lake or some of the other lakes associated with the Finger Lakes. And then as far as information as to what this creature could be, There are several theories altogether. One I was mentioning earlier, again, it's either something involving like a Loch Ness type monster, a misidentified creature that hasn't been let's say categorized yet. It's just altogether its own different species, or it could actually be a real species. In this case, a lake sturgeon, but a much larger one, and that's why it's considered something else that's not really a cryptid, but more of, let's say, spotty witness type misidentification stuff. And then another one is yet another uncharacterized species or categorized species of eel. Something, again, being a giant eel that just hasn't been listed by scientists, and then that's why it could be there altogether. But who knows as far as what this creature is and what it entails. There just hasn't been too much eyewitness accounts, experiences, let alone studies done on it to try to figure out what it is. The people don't even know if it's necessarily even a fish or if some other type of eel or some other type of cryptid. But either way, though, it still remains a very, very fascinating creature that could be found there in Cayuga Lake. So those of you, again, that are in the New York area, if you happen to go by those Finger Lakes, and let's say you're boating or you're camping nearby Cayuga Lake, take a look next time closer to the waters, because who knows, you may actually see this particular Loch Ness type creature. But if anybody has any more info, anything else I might have missed, then please post those comments below. I'd love to hear about those of you that live near that area in Cayuga Lake, those of you that have vacationed there or gone there, spent time during your youth there, and so on. I'd love to hear what your experiences or tales that you've heard are of this creature of Old Greeny from that lake. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.